Hey folks, it's Friendo, and I look terrible. I am at the airport, and I am in the middle of a 13-hour layover. So while I was sitting around, I was just thinking of things, and I wanted to address this point of definitions. It seems to me in the debates there was this issue of how we figure out how things should be defined, what definitions should be, and I think the positions that were presented on both sides really missed the nature of understanding. And I think it's important to draw definitions out that way. That if we are not expressing some sort of understanding of things, then we don't really have definitions. In philosophy, one of the first things that any writer does is establish their own set of definitions. And the reason is that philosophers draw distinctions. So, for example, I was having a discussion with someone, and we were using the word feelings, and it became clear to me that we were using the term very differently. He was equating feelings with states of being that could be determined medically, and I was using the word feelings to express things that are part of our internal perceptive reality that don't necessarily match up to chemical and electrical states. And to better illustrate our points, I think the way he was using the word feelings should be drawn out as sensations. And the way I was using the word feelings should be drawn out as emotions. And then the conversation could go from there. But the system that I would use to discuss what things are and how we determine definitions relies on three different categories. We have understanding of things as objects, understanding of things as perception, and understanding of things as ideas. And so when we look at things as objects, this is where they are in their state, what they are even if we didn't look at them. And to make these kinds of determinations, we try to look at the hard attributes of these things, even if they are relative. So, for example, material substances can be rated on hardness, and it's basically hardness against diamond. So, with diamond being a 10 on the scale, you can go from 1 to 10. And so the determination is purely relative. How does it relate toward this material? But it is objective. It is testable. And then there is perception, perceptive reality, and this is where we actually exist. What we experience in the world is not the world as object, but is world as we perceive it. And we overcome our perceptions in a variety of ways, methods we've discovered or concocted, like logic, mathematics, and science. But a lot of actual reality, objective reality, is counterintuitive. It actually violates our perception. And a lot of the things that we perceive that are vital to how we understand the world are not actually true. They're not actually things. So, for example, hot and cold is a false dichotomy. Heat is a thing. It's a level of energy that is resident in matter, comparable to its surroundings. Cold is something that we perceive from matter that is at lower states of energy. But cold itself is not a thing. It is an illusion brought about by our perceptions as temperatures decrease. Similarly, darkness. Light is a real thing. It is an energetic substance we can study and observe. Black is a real thing. There are pigments that absorb all light and leave this absence of perception of visible light. But darkness is not a real thing. It is the absence of the ability for our eyes to perceive any spectrum of visible light for any number of reasons. So perception has to be understood as the method by which we ascertain what objects really are, but it's what is between them and us. And then in the third category, we have ideas. And this is supremely important for being a human being. The capacity for abstract thought means you can look at things, put them together, create patterns, and ideas can be totally made up. They can be fictional. They can be useful even if they are fictional. They give you an understanding of the world. They give you meaning in life. But we have to understand that assigning a definition to something that is purely abstract, that is an idea that you have in your head, in no way relates to the actual reality of that thing. So if we're having debates of category, like, well, what is food? Or what are chairs? Or what are words? What does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be atheist? I think we need to steer as far away from ideas as we can, at least until we have, in the way philosophers attempt to draw distinctions, once we have the groundwork set up, once we have the rules of the debate established, because otherwise we're going into this intellectually unarmed. We are just throwing words at each other, and all that does is serve either to feed or frustrate us emotionally. It's purely a matter of ego. So when I was watching, these debates, and a lot of people, I think on both sides, found them very frustrating because of this inability to reach consensus on words, perception, and ideas all simultaneously. So the question of, for example, if there's people who disagree on what food is, how well does this metaphor map up to this question of religion? And ostensibly quite well, but with some real problems. Food is something that we objectively require. We can actually medically test whether or not something is nutritious, whether or not it will support our ongoing metabolic functions. Whereas we really can't do that with religion. It's far more subjective if it is good or bad, and it's far more determined in the individual what good or bad even means. Personally, I'm glad I left the Catholic Church. I'm glad I don't have religion in my life. I think it's been an enormously positive experience for me. But I can't cross-apply that to someone else. I can't predict what would bring someone peace in their lives. And I think that's something people have to discover for themselves. But to say that something is not food is not the equivalent of saying it's poison. So to say that we only have these two options, it's food or it's not food, and if it's not food, don't put it in your mouth. There are people who argue that things that you can eat, that you can derive nourishment from, are not food. They are not proper food. And so we have these other categories: junk food, sweets, snacks, things that it's okay to eat, but you should not plan your meals around, right? And when the representative of McDonald's says there's nothing on the menu that's unhealthy, that can be true and also misleading. if you're expecting it to be food, I guess you can go to McDonald's, eat anything on the menu every day, and survive. Well, you're probably only going to make it so far. So in that sense, it's unhealthy. But as we have developed our food technology to have more and more refined foods, this has come up before with things like white rice and white bread. Today, when you buy them in a supermarket, they're fortified with iron because the refining process strips the grains of iron. And if you are eating these as staples and you're not getting a whole lot else, you will develop an iron deficiency. Now, does that mean that white rice and white bread are not food? Well, there are those who would contend that they're not, but that's based on their idea. That's not food as perception, that's not food as object. But when we get into something like the discussion of what is a chair, we've now moved into synthetic properties. Materially speaking, objectively speaking, chair is whatever material it's made of. If it's plastic, then it's petroleum derived. If it's wood, then it's a tree. Well, or wood, the substance you get from processing a tree. That it's a chair is something that we have imposed upon this material substance. In conversation, in a comment exchange, Gamut Man presented a really interesting turn on the chair issue. He presented me with, I could create a chair that is microscopic in size. No human being, no living human being could ever possibly use it. But I can show you under an electron microscope, there it is, there's the chair. It has all the design characteristics of a chair. Now, it's a chair, even though it can never be used. Meanwhile, I can take any random bit of useful stuff from around. He used an oil can as an example, and sit on it. By sitting on it, it's a chair, but only for the duration of the time I sit on it. Now, I disagree. I don't think that challenge he presented actually gets us anywhere, interesting as it is, because oil can also isn't a natural substance. It's an object that was created for a purpose. And so similarly, you can say, if I never put oil in the oil can as an oil can, what if I fill it up with water? And you can stick to your definition and say, well, no, I made it to be an oil can. That is its design, that is its function. The fact that it is filled with water, that's the function that you're using it for, and it's never going to hold oil, doesn't at all relate to whether or not it's an oil can. And the reason I find this problematic, and I'm speaking as an atheist, is this is the theist point of view definitions, that everything that exists is created and that there is purpose behind all the things that are there. In Hinduism, I believe in Buddhism as well, they use similar terms. They call it dharma. So sugar, for example, has the dharma of sweetness. That is its purpose. Where I would contend that sugars are the byproduct of biological evolution. They are effect. They are not cause. So oil can is effect. It is not cause. Chairs are effect. They are not cause. And our relationship to food is somewhere in between. We are required to ingest nutritious substances. But without ingesting nutritious substances, we are not here. That's natural. Religion is not natural. It is social. in that sense, it is synthetic. It is a part of how we interact, how we have up to this point. I don't think it's necessary, but it does exist. And in terms of understanding it, in terms of defining it, in terms of debating it, I think we have to understand it as object, as perception, and as idea. And I think the arguments that anti-theists are making are solely focusing on this idea that there has to be a perfect, correct, particularly Christian religion. That we can do things like take the Bible and just do away with all extra textual criticism. We can do away with all historical and contextual and other critical lenses, and just say, well, we have the book, and the book, this is what it literally says, so this is the standard to which we hold all Christians. And I think in doing that, as I stated in a previous video, you are giving up on the scientific principles of observation. And I think I understand why these arguments are being made. There's an emotional drive to make a political argument, and I think it's taken people away from objectivity, from being able to think about things in a critical manner. So instead, they will pursue an agenda, which they've stated, for emotional reasons, and appeal to people for emotional reasons. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily bad to use emotional appeals to make political arguments. It's just that in the atheist community, we've spent a lot of time criticizing the religious for doing exactly that. We've made this a fundamental criticism that being atheist, being against religion, is about being rational. And then when you ignore religion as object and religion as perception in your arguments against religion, you're simply throwing away data, and it's not rational. And at that point, I think you have lost your objectivity. So, those are my thoughts on the subject. Take care, and I will talk to you all later.